let me give you a picture that I want you to take with you that I can think, or that I think can be a great anchor for you to, back to my original point, how do you answer the question, how am I doing? It's something that I refer to in my book Integrity as the wake. Probably because I'm a boater and I love being on the ocean. I picked a nautical metaphor, but here's the deal, okay? A boat leaves a wake behind it. And as the boat goes across the ocean, if you're sitting on the back of the boat, and you look back this way, you're gonna see a wake behind you. Now, out here's the ocean in front, right? Well, here's the deal about the wake. A captain can walk around the ship, doing whatever he or she is doing, have it on autopilot, set the heading, and every now and then glance back at the wake, and you can tell everything by the wake of how the boat is doing. For example, if you look back and it's zigzagging or it's made a turn, the captain's going to go, oh my gosh, I got to go adjust something on the heading of the ship. Something's wrong here. Or if the wake's too steep, for example, there's too much drag, he's thinking we're burning too much fuel, he goes and changes it. Or if it's too shallow, he's thinking our speed is too high. You can tell a lot by the ship by the wake. Your wake as a leader can tell you everything about your character. And you can ask yourself, how am I doing? Well, if you just think about yourself, you'll probably miss it because we're all subjective. But if you ask yourself, how is my wake? Your wake will tell you how you're doing. But what does this wake consist of? Take all the leadership research, all the literature on the whole planet, and do a factor analysis of it, which means we ask the question, what are the real factors that leadership is about? It always comes down to two. The first one is the mission, the task, the results. Task, there we go. In other words, a leader is supposed to get something accomplished. You're leading an organization. How are the numbers? Did you reach the goals? Did you open new markets? Did you gain market share? Did you get new customers? Was there innovation? And when you ask people, when Joe led the company, what was it like? They will tell you the wake that Joe left behind in his leadership. They'll say, oh my gosh, when he was here, it was amazing. We expanded globally. We used to be this little bitty firm and we did all of this, and we went public, or we increased market share. And the wake that Joe left behind in that company is very visible, and you know a lot about the person of Joe by looking at those results. Okay, so that's the first side. The other side is Joe also left a wake behind in terms of the people. So the second side, if this is the first side, the mission or the task, the second side is the relationships. Did Joe increase market share but leave a lot of bodies floating out there bloody in the ocean like shark bait? In other words, you run over a lot of people to get there, and when you go interview somebody and say, what was it like when Joe was the leader here? And Joe headed this up, they say, well, we accomplished a lot, but we hated the culture. Because Joe, he had high expectations, or he was harsh. Or do people say, oh gosh, do we miss Joe? Because when he was here, I've never grown so much as a person, as a leader, in my competencies. I wish we could have him back, because Joe was the kind of person you just wanted to live in his wake, because of the atmosphere and the culture that he created. See, that is actually the real reading on how we're doing. So what I tell leaders to do is it's very, very important to not believe the press reports. Everybody will flatter you, or everybody's got their own agenda. Look at the video, because video doesn't lie. Look at your last month and your last 6 months and your last year and your last 5 years and back over the course of your entire career. What were the real results? Because the numbers, at the end of the day, they don't lie. And we can explain them away. I remember I grew up a competitive golfer. And my teacher, my pro, when I was a kid, I would go play around in a tournament. I'd come back and say, he would say, so how'd it go? And I'd say, well, gosh, I was 2 under until number 16. And then I hit the shot, and a bird came and grabbed it in his mouth and flew over and dropped it in a trash can, and the truck picked it up and took it out of bounds. and I would explain how everything went and all the reasons why maybe I didn't break par or something like that. And he would always interrupt me and he asked me this question. He said, I didn't ask you how, I asked you how many. In other words, don't give me all the noise and the editorializing. I want to know the score. Ultimately, leaders have got to ask themselves, apart from all the explaining away, what's the score? I mean, am I reaching my full potential? Am I really getting the most out of my talents and abilities and the resources, the opportunities of this company that I should be? And on the second side, what's it really like with the people? Do I have long-term, deepening, trusting relationships with people that are grateful? Or is it littered with broken relationships and conflicts and lawsuits and just people that, you know, kind of would want to move on? And probably it's a smattering of some degree of both, but you can always know how you're doing by these two things. All right, now I want to give you one more component of this. See these waves out here? This is, for a boat, this is reality. I told you I'm a boater, and a lot of times on the ocean, if, you know, headed out to, you know, across the Pacific to the Channel Islands, for example, what the captain will do is call and check out, you know, the weather report and, you know, what does the surf look like and the swells and all of that. Because if, you know, you're in 8 or 10 foot seas out there, you got to first of all ask yourself, does this vessel perform in that, or is that something that's going to crack the hull? You know, if the reality demands are at a certain level, the ship's going to do fine. What if a storm comes? You know, what if the reality looks like this? Then is the character of this vessel, is the makeup of this vessel ready to handle that? Now, I can promise you, here's the big thing about leadership. If you do your job well, this is what you're headed for. That's success, to find bigger problems, right? To find, you know, it's a lot more difficult when you're trying to negotiate, you know, opening up the whole world, for example, to, you know, a little neighborhood stand. And that's the kind of problems you want to have. But you've got to be growing in your makeup with this. So what happens when you start to deal with tougher people, tougher situations, tougher negotiations, all this sort of stuff? Have you worked on the cracks in here, both on the interpersonal side, the internal side, and the business side that get into those issues in your makeup? And there are a lot of these. There are, like I mentioned, the tough people you have to deal with. There's the failure. What do you do, for example? Here's a great one. What do you do when you've poured your life into this vision and launched into this thing, and you've been working on it for a year, and you get the, you know, the first 6 months numbers back and they're really not good? What happens inside the ship? Do alarms go off and you begin to feel like a loser, and fight or flight syndrome and stress kicks in, and you think, you know, why did I even try this, and we're not going to make it? Or is the makeup such that, like good leaders do, that hits them, you know, and they feel it, but it actually kicks in positive sorts of faculties and abilities in them where they lean into the problem and start to solve it? That's just one little indication. So I want you to go ask yourself, what does my wake look like? And go ask some other people. This is what a good 360 does and other feedback mechanisms. Get a good picture of your wake and let that tell you, what are some issues that I need to do in my own growth and development, so when I take this company, if here's where we are today, when I take it to here, I am going to be ready, okay? Try that out, see if it works for you. Thanks. One of the, I think, easiest ways to do this is if you look at the concentric circles of the people that you interface with, you know, start with your executive team, start with your assistants, start with your direct reports, start with a few key alliances and partners and other organizations you work with, or even customers. and just go to them. You want to do it informally? Just go to them and say, you know what, we've been together a while and I'm really working on being the best leader I can be. I want to ask you a question and I want you to be totally honest with me, okay? What's it like to be on the other side of me? One way to do this, I do this a lot as a coach. If I'm working with an executive, I will come in and they will give me the list of people they want me to interview. And I'll go in and I'll talk to them confidentially, and you assure them this isn't going to come back on their heads. Confidentially, what's it like to be on the other side of Joe or Susie? And you get a good coach to gather all of that, pull out the issues, and then, you come find out about it. Another way to do it is do anonymous, sorts of surveys. You could do this without, a lot of complicated assessment tools. You just take the same kinds of questions, you give them to them, find an anonymous way that they can respond, and you take a look at it. Now, another thing about your wake is this, that I like to see people, for the purpose of having an integrated character, I like to see people do the full 360 where they're getting feedback from all areas. In other words, you might get feedback from a board member and they go, oh my gosh, you're awesome. Well, yeah, you probably are with them because they have power over you and you're trying to please them in some way. But what does the parking attendant think? What does the assistant think? I want you to not just get the people that you suck up to or have to, dance for, but I want you to also be getting feedback from the people that you have to perform for that have no leverage over you. Then the other thing I would want you to do is, look at the dimensions of both sides. On the performance side, what were your real achievements in closing the gap in relation to your stated objectives? If you said, for example, we're going to open up 12 new markets this year, or we're going to, grow the top line by a certain percentage, how did you do on delivering that? Because what that's going to tell you is one of two things about your wake. Either you performed well, or maybe you performed well, but part of the wake in your history is over-promising to people. So you just want to look at the history of this. And then on the relational side, ask them, how connected do you feel to me? Do you feel like when you walk away from an interaction with me, you've actually been with somebody, that I was present? Was I listening? Do you feel like I understand what you need for me to understand? Do you feel like that I'm always trying to persuade you of my reality, or can I take yours into account? What about on the imperfection-perfection continuum? Do I require perfection from you and kind of beat you up when you don't hit the mark? Do I come back at you with a tone that causes you to not be your best? Or do I forget the standard altogether and kind of like I'm not hard enough on you? We can do either. And then how do I do in developing your gifts and giving you a space to become all that you need to be, and to be able to think for yourself and sort of like be an adult here? Do you feel mutually respected? You get into those kinds of relational dynamics. What's the mood? Am I angry? Am I hard to deal with? Get specific about this stuff. And what you're going to find is it's going to tell you the next step. So the next step is, okay, if that's the wake, what do I need to do with the boat? Where do I need to work on this? What are my key issues in the next 6 months that I want to see change in?